When we last left off, we had completed the markup for our home page. Now we get to begin more of the fun part of styling our design. So the first thing we need to do to style something is we need a style sheet. Now, there are many different methods when you begin your CSS file. Some people prefer to embrace the default stylings that each browser implements. So what do I mean by that? Every browser will by default use its own style sheet to style the markup. For instance, on browsers by default, the body element will contain, if you can see here, just a little bit of spacing between the text and the border right there, if you can see that. What is causing that? We're not using any style. Have you ever wondered, why is this what we do? Why is that bold? What is telling it? We've created markup, but what style is actually telling it to be bold? And this refers to the default browser styling. Now this would be fantastic, but unfortunately, from browser to browser, they implement this slightly different from each other. So what many prefer to do, including myself, is to go ahead and apply a mass reset, which will reset the entire stylings for every browser, and then you can start from scratch. That way you can be 100% sure that what you are selecting is what's going to show up on the page. So the first thing we're going to do is import a reset.css file. Now there's many located around the web, or you can build your own. We're going to go ahead and take advantage of probably the most popular one, which is created by Eric Meyer. So if you take a look, you can see, remember what this does is it resets the default browser styling for all of the elements. So you can see it resets any margins and padding, it states the line height, and things of that nature. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to come back to our project, and now we're going to create a new style sheet. So I'm going to bring back the file browser, and we're going to create a new folder for our CSS. That way we're as organized as possible. And within CSS, I'm going to create a new file called reset.css. I'm going to paste that in, and we're done. So I'm going to close that out. But now, just because we've created a style sheet doesn't mean our project is automatically going to reference it. We'll do that now. Let's go ahead and change the title to Lightbox before I forget. And now I'm going to do link rel equals style sheet, and the ref is going to be css/reset.css. And now, did you see what happened there? It immediately reset all the styling. Great, good deal. And that's exactly what we want. Now we can begin our styling. Now, the first thing, we'll create a new file, and we're going to call this default.css or style.css, you'll see commonly. And now that that's created, let's go ahead and import that one as well. CSS default.css. Now what I'm going to do in this case is, if you'll notice here, I want to give you an easy way to see the changes. So what we're going to do for the beginning is we're going to style type equals text/CSS, and we're going to do it inline the page, and that way when I make a change like background red, you will immediately see it in the side. And then when we're finished with this, I will simply copy this and paste it into its own style sheet. But with this method, you get real-time results, and I think that's what we're going to do. Okay? So just know, in a real project, you really don't want to put your stylings in line. You want to move them out to their own style sheet. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is just give some information, theme name. This is just for people looking over. It's called Lightbox. And let's see what else we want to do. Let's go ahead and put this on its own line. Description for Minibook. And designer. The person who designed this is actually our CEO, Khalis Taid. And the slicer coder is myself, Jeffrey Way. And now we can begin. So the first step I'm going to do is the generic styles. And these, it's generally a good practice to give headings to different parts of your style sheet. That way you can easily reference them. Let's go ahead with the body. First thing I'll do here is give it a background color, and this is where we need to begin figuring it out. Okay, so if you come in here, we want to give a background equal to this background image that we sliced out, if you remember from earlier. Now if we look, it's bg.jpg. So we're going to do URL, and we need to reference it so it's within a style sheet, but for now we're just going to do images/bg.jpg. And now if I look over here, you can see that it's extending for the entire width of the screen, but we want to make sure that we enforce that, so I'm going to do repeat X even though it does that by default. And now we can see it like so. Okay, let's continue on. Now, one thing I want to show you here, let's go ahead and get rid of the file browser. That way we have a little more real estate. Is if we come down to the bottom, do you see right here there's a big distinction between the bottom of the image and the background? We want to make sure the background of the body element is equal to the bottom of this image. So the way we can do that is go ahead, get the eyedropper tool, and just select what it is at the bottom. And let's just do this real quickly. And you can see that's about the bottom is this one right here. So I'm going to copy that hex value and come back to my project, expand this just a bit. And at the beginning, I'm going to set that as a background. And now, if we scroll down, you'll see that once we get to the bottom of the image, we set the background color equal to that value. That way it looks like it's a perfect transition. Cool, good job. The next step is text align center. What does this do? This is your first browser quirk. And it's technically not even that necessary, but what we want to do, remember, is we want our main content to be centered on the page. And in older versions of browsers, they don't implement that effectively. So this will force our container to be centered in Internet Explorer 5. With that in mind, don't worry about this too much. It's more of a habit of myself, and you can probably get away with keeping it out. The next step is font family. What are we going to set this to? Well, when you're slicing a design, it's good to find out what text are we using. So we can find this out. We can select a text and find out what font it is. And you can see right there, it's Helvetica. All right. So we can do font family, Helvetica. If the user does not have Helvetica on their screen, Arial is very similar. You might even have trouble finding the difference. And finally, by default, just do a sans serif. And there we go. Now, finally, line height. We're going to set the line height. What is the line height? That's the, as you would guess, the height of each individual line right there. And once again, if we want to find out the information of, we can go here. Actually, let's go and select this one right here. And if we click on this tool right here, it'll bring up the character palette. And this is where we can actually examine, like the font size is 18 pixels. The line height, notice that right there. If we make it shorter, you can see what it does. All right, I'm going to bring that back to 25. So we know a font size of 18 pixels and a line height of 25. And you'll notice right there, I've restated that. And that should be good now. Let's continue on, and let's set some base styling for the heading since we did go ahead and reset it. What I'll do here is I'm going to set some default margins, and it's going to be 25 pixels on the top and bottom and 0 on the left and right. So when we do it this method, it would be 25 top and bottom and then left and right. So we could also do it like this, which would be like a clock, 25 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 25 pixels on the bottom, and 0 on the left. But in this case, I'm going to use the shorthand, which is top and bottom and left and right, respectively. Once again, this comes from playing around and measuring the margins on the page. Let's continue on. The next one I'm going to do is the heading to. So what is this referring to? It's referring to what we do. And let's see if there's anything else. Recent work, those big headings. So let's see what we can do here. Font size is 41 pixels. At the beginning, we're going to figure out exactly how I got these values, and then later I will assume that you know how I got them. And you know what? I don't seem to have that font on this particular computer, but that's okay, because if we look, we can see that the font size is 41 pixels. So let's come on back, and I'm going to set the font size to 41 pixels. It's as simple as that, going to your Photoshop file, finding out the values, and translating them to CSS. Next is the color. I have it set to F231E, and once again, that's such a simple matter of just checking out what your color is. So I can go right here, and if I can come up, right up here, there's the color. Copy that, come on back to our page, and paste it in, and you're done. Pretty simple. Let's continue on. Padding bottom. This is using the ruler tool, and I found that to be 25 pixels. Next, margin top is 45 pixels, and a border bottom. Let me go ahead and finish these, and then we'll go over them. 1 pixel, solid, and CEC5C0. Oops, CEC5. Sorry about that. I'm reading off my notes here. And that should be good for that section. So how did we get these values? You see the heading there? We added a nice spacing. So if we come back here, what we want to do, I'm going to go up to the eyedropper tool up here, and I'm going to hold down and come down to the ruler tool. And now here's where we can actually measure the distance. So if I zoom in and I find out how much spacing I want from the bottom of the text to the border, I can just simply click right there. I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure that they're only straight lines and not like so. I'm going to hold that down and bring it down to where the line is. And if you look at the very top right here, you can see about 24 pixels. In my case, looks like I came to about 25 when I originally did it. And remember, that's it. It's just a matter of getting your ruler. It's the same for your margins. I came to 45 pixels, and that's the length from the line to the beginning of our text. And if you look once again right around here, you'll see it comes right to around 45 pixels where our text begins. It's as simple as that. Let's continue on. And once again, the color, just to once again reiterate before we start autopiloting this, is just checking the eyedropper tool and measuring the color of this and applying that value. Very simple. Let's move on a little bit faster now. I'm going to do the H3, and this one is styling. Let me zoom out just a bit. Web development, graphics, and usability design. Now here we're going to do color, and when I measured, I got 745459. And a font size, when I measured it, it said 30 pixels, and a line height was a little bit higher this time of 33 pixels. All right, and that's styling these right here. All right, the next step is the heading 4. We need to apply a few more for our base elements. Let's see what was an H4 tag. Let's scroll down just a ways, and it looks like we don't specifically have any H4 tags, but we will on our subpages. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and give those some base styling, and a color of 2F231E, and a line height of 20 pixels, font size. And don't worry about this right now. We will go into this further once we get to that section. And a text, transform, uppercase, because I want all of the text to be large. So don't worry about this yet. We will come back. Now we're going to style all of the paragraph elements on the page. Color, let's go ahead and do this manually. If we want to get this right here, let's find out what color that is. Looks like it's this color right here. Copy that, come out, come back in. Color is going to be equal to that value. And now you can see we have a nicer shade. Next, font size, measured it, and it was 13 pixels. And the font family is actually Arial for that text. There we go. Now, anchor tags, all anchor tags on the page. By default, you see that they're blue and they have an underline. I don't want that in this case. I'm going to do text decoration is none, and you'll see that underline is removed. And then I want the color, we're just going to set it to solid black for now. Let's move on. Now what happens, we want to go ahead and give the user some feedback when they hover over an anchor tag. So I'm going to do A, and then we're going to do a pseudo class of hover. And this literally means when the user hovers over that anchor tag, then apply the following styles. And here we're just going to add that underline back in. You'll see this is very common. And now if I hover over it, you'll see the underline come. Cool. Let's continue on. Container, main, list item. What is this referring to? Let's scroll down, and we're going to container and then main, and we're styling all list items within this section. I'm going to do color, and what I measured it was 645A56. Okay, a little bit different color. Font size was 13 pixels when I measured it, and a margin bottom of 27 pixels. And now you can see this is the spacing. If I measure in, right around there, and you can see right up there, right around 37 pixels, and looks like I came a little bit lower. Let's see, right, because we have the icon comes up a bit higher. So maybe right around there, and you see that's 27 pixels, and that's how I got that value. Let's continue on. The next part is the block quote on the page. If we can find it, right here is our block quote. We're going to style that. And I'm going to say the background. Let's go ahead and find out what the background color is. I'm going to zoom out, zoom in. I'm going to grab the, at this point I can go ahead and flatten it just so I don't have any problems with selecting colors. And I'm going to select that, and there's the background of our block quote. Come back and background, make sure I have the hash and then that value. And you may not be able to see it on this resolution, but it's a slightly different shade, and you should be able to see it soon. Now I'm going to give it a color, and the color that I selected was 7F6357. And next we have padding, 23 pixels. If we set one value, that's all around. And finally, the font is, we're going to use the shorthand for the font. Instead of doing font family and font size and things of that nature, we're going to do it all in one. So I want the font to be italic, because if we come up, you can see it's italic. And the next step is 20 pixels tall, and I want the line height to be 27 pixels. Once again, that's just taken from measuring it. And actually, the font that Collis used when he designed this for that section is Georgia. And I can't select it, but let's jump back just a bit. Select it, and you can see at the top, Georgia, italic, 20 pixels. And you can see we've just restated that. Georgia, italic, 20 pixels, and the line height was 27 pixels. Okay, that's starting to look good. Now let's do the block quote. And now we're going to get the paragraph tag within the block quote. And I'm going to set the font size. I'm going to restate that at 20 pixels. And the next step is the color. I'm also going to set that to the same value as we have here. Even though it's not overly necessary, it doesn't hurt to restate that. And then I'm going to set a margin bottom of 1em. Okay, so if we get rid of that, you can see what that does. That gives a little bit of spacing between each of the paragraphs of about 1em. And if you're unfamiliar with what the em unit of measurement is, we will discuss that shortly. And the final thing here is font family, Georgia. And the reason that's not taking an effect, if you notice, we set it up there in the block quote, but why wasn't the paragraph inheriting that value as well? And it's because up here we've overwritten that value and set it to Arial. So we want to override it again and say the paragraph within the block quote, make sure that the font family is equal to Georgia. Okay? And that should be good. So the next step is we're going to take care of the arrow. But you know what? I'm going to make a placeholder for that because it's about too soon for that. So we'll come back to that. And then we'll do it later. Now we're going to do forms. That's going to have a section. In forms, this is how we can delineate each section. And the next part will be navigation. Okay, so we've done a little bit of preparation. Let's go get rid of that. Okay, and we'll do forms later because I want you to see the effects of the base part of the design first. So let's go in and we're going to do container ul nav. Okay, how did we access this? We are going first within the wrapping container element. Then we find the nav. Let's go up here. I'm going to scroll to the top so you can see what we're working with all the way up there. Don't worry if it works strange. We'll figure it out soon. We're going to do float right, because if you come back here, I know it can be confusing when you're first styling and you see this big mess right here and you think, oh gosh, how can I even begin? Just take it step by step and I promise it gets easier and easier. Up here, we see that the navigation, it's all the way to the right. So we need to make sure that we float that section to the right, as you can see here. Height is, when I measured it with the ruler tool, I found that it was 111 pixels tall. Next is margin. I don't want any margins on that, so I'm going to make sure I reset that. And the margin top, I'm going to set to -13 pixels. And that's going to push it up because I want that text nicely within this dark brown area. And you can see that fits nicely. And the final thing I'm going to do here is let's set a background just for an example of red. You can see it right there. But as soon as we go below and we say nav list items, because we don't want those list items to be displayed on top of one another. We want them in a line correct? So we're going to do float, and we're going to float each of those to the left. That way we get this nice example right here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this background for now, and we'll come back to that shortly. Now we're going to do font size. When I measured it, it came to 11 pixels. A font family, we're going to restate at Arial. Text align is center. So why are we centering this text? And it's because we're eventually going to be having an icon, and you notice how that text is centered right with the icon. Next step is a width, 112 pixels. So what does this mean? Each of these will have their own stated width. So how can we figure out how to do this? It's a bit difficult, and don't worry if it seems confusing at first. We're going to come back over that. A height of 111 pixels. Once again, we want it to take up the entire height of our unordered list. And continuing on, I'm going to set a margin right of 20 pixels. And if you'd like to see that better, let's set a color of white to the anchor tag. So we'll do nav li a just for now. Clean this up just a tad. And now you can see that we've set some margins, and that's just to give it some breathing room, as you can see. Okay? Continuing on, I'm going to do list style. Type is none, and what this does is it ensures that there are no bullets associated with the list item. And finally, we're going to add something called behavior, but I'm not going to do this just yet. I'm just going to make a placeholder for myself right now because it's beyond the scope of what you're learning right now. So I'm just going to leave a note here for me to add that. And I'm also going to do the same thing here. So don't worry about this yet. This is things you will learn in the future when you're ready, but we're not to that point just yet. Now let's go ahead and style the anchor tags. The color is, if we need to measure, come down. With the eyedropper tool, I'm just going to select this, and whoops, let's go ahead and flatten this image. Select that, and you can see that's about the color we end up with. Now, depending on where we select, it could be slightly different. I'm going to choose that one right there. Come back, and now the color is going to be equal to that value, kind of a nicer shade of brown. The height, once again, I'm going to make sure that I restate that, and we'll go over this shortly. It's just to make sure that it takes up as much height as possible. I want them to be displayed as block level elements. Once again, we're going to go over all of this shortly, so don't worry if it's a little overhead. Padding top, 86 pixels, and that's going to push them down. Don't worry, we'll come back to that. And then finally, if we come back, you'll see how those are all uppercase, all the letters. We can do that with CSS, doing text, transform, uppercase. And now you'll see that they've been converted to uppercase letters. Finally, I'm going to do text align center, and padding left, 10 pixels. And that's going to push those over slightly. Now before we move forward, let's take a look. I'm going to zoom out. And do you notice something right here? If we zoom in, we can see a little bit of a border right here. If I click on that, you'll see that just right on the header, there's this color border. So if you need to play with it, get that exact hex value and copy that. And we want to make sure on our header that we make sure that it has the left and right border equal to that value. So let's go ahead and set that right now. So we'll do that. Where can we do that? Let's see. Let's do it right up here. And we're going to do container, or I'm sorry, header. And we'll say border left is 1 pixel solid, and paste that value in. And the same is going to be true for border right. Okay. And once again, I'm going to add this note to myself that you don't need to worry about. And now if I scroll to the left, unfortunately I just don't have much real estate on this screen. You're not going to see anything just yet, and let's see why. Let's go back to header, and let's set a background. If you're ever confused and an element isn't displaying the way you would hope, set a background color and see what you end up with. Okay, let's zoom this out entirely. And you can see it seems to be taking up the entire screen. So how come is that? And it's because by default, block level elements like divs will take up as much space as they possibly can on the page. So we need to specifically state how wide our container is, correct? So if we come right here and zoom out, how can we determine this? We can use the ruler tool once again. So we have a couple methods here. Why don't we, right here, let's drag a ruler because that's the edge of one side. And let's do another one to the other side. And we're going to bring a ruler and zoom out. And now with the ruler tool selected, I can easily measure, whoops, I brought that wrong. Let's remove that over there. Selecting it, and now let's do it again. Holding down Shift to make sure it's a straight line. And you can see what value we come up with is right around 1,000 pixels. Let's come back and expand this. And let's add it right here, container. Now, when I measured it myself, it was a little bit bigger, and I found it at 1,002 pixels. Now let's see what happens. So now you can see it's only taking up that value, but it's right against the left edge. So if we can work around that, we're going to use a trick called margin auto. So what does this do? You're telling it the container of 1,002 pixels to make its left margin and its right margin the exact same amount. And the only way to do that, if you actually work it out, is if it's centered on the page like you can see right here. So now the huge header is centered on the page. Good. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that header background. Expand it. And now you can see on our header, we have those borders that we set right there. Okay, good. I'm going to do a bit more. Now you can see when we applied that bug fix on the body element, we aligned all of the text to the center, but we obviously don't want that. So let's go ahead and align the text back to the left. And now you'll see it all the way against the left edge. There you go. Next, I'm going to set a new positioning context. That way, when we absolutely position elements within container, they will be positioned in reference to where the container is. And if you're confused about that, look at the applicable screencast that's included within the assets folder for a discussion on absolute and relative positioning. And the final thing I'm going to do is set a background to our container. And I'm setting it to F7, F5, F4. And you can see we're just setting it equal to this value right here, this background color. And you can see right there, I just copied that and pasted it as the background of our container, like so. Okay, we're getting there. I'm going to make another note to myself. Don't worry about this, we'll come back to this later. So the next step is to apply our icons. So you see right here that our icons are kind of right through the middle right here. So we need to apply an icon to each one. But let's figure out how we can actually do that, because let's say we want to target this home list item. How can we target that one specifically and say use that home icon, or this one and say use the work icon? Well, in this state, at least not with applying to all browsers, we can use some advanced CSS selecting, but it won't work on every browser. So what we need to do instead is apply IDs to each of these list items so that we can target them. So home, we're going to do ID equals li home. And this next one will be ID equals li work. ID equals li about. And ID equals li contact. And now we have something to latch onto to apply the necessary styling. So let's come back and come down right here. We're going to say now the icons for the navigation. And we're going to say nav li with an ID of li home is what we called it. And if we'll go background, and that's going to be equal to URL, and let's figure out what we called it. So let's go back to view, show file browser, and it's going to be within images. And if you remember in the previous lesson, I made a mistake and I named them incorrectly. So let's fix that right now. Briefcase should be work. So let's go ahead and rename that to work. Let's see what else. The paint bucket should be about. So I called it paint bucket, and let's change that to about. Okay, so it's images and then those names. Let's go ahead and hide the file browser once again and close out these images. The background URL will be images, and I'll scroll to the top so you can see images/home.png. And I don't want it to repeat. Remember, the default action for background images is to repeat. And I want it in the top left corner. We can leave it like that, or we can restate it by saying 0 pixels from the left and 0 pixels from the top. Either way is fine with me. And now you can see lined up right there is our icon. So let's do this once again for the rest of them. So let's zoom this out and see if we can expedite this a bit. I'm going to do the next one, and we had a total of 4, correct? So li work about contact, and then let's replace these accordingly as well. And let's zoom over, and now you can see all 4 of those icons. Good, definitely getting better. But you can see we have this big white background, but that's not right because we have this nicer background right here, and then that color only takes place underneath the header. So if we zoom in, you can see that we have some multiple colors going on here. We have a dark brown, and then we have a border, and then a lighter brown, and then another border. So why don't we do this? Why don't we grab only this section? Whoops, excuse me. Zoom in and see if we can grab a new background specifically for the container. So I'm going to get the marquee tool, and I'm just going to grab from the top a section about like so. That should be good. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to hit Command C, Command N to create a new file, Command V to paste it in, and now save for web. And we're going to save it not as a PNG 24 but as a JPEG. Let's see, 402 pixels, or as a PNG is a little bit larger. So JPEG is going to be the way to go in this case. Save it, and I'm going to call it container BG. Now that we've done that, let's close that out and come back to our project and add that. And let's see what we can do there. Let's expand this a bit, and we're going to come into container, and now we're going to add this. So get rid of that. Good thing I had a note for myself. And we are going to do a URL equal to that place. So it's going to be URL images/container bg.jpg, and I do want it to repeat X. And now we're starting to see our website take shape, are we not? There you go. Starting to look better. It looks like we still have some margin issues, but we will be sure to fix that. So let's take a look. It looks like we have at the very top just some spacing right up there that's not lining up, and it might be because of our lightbox heading. So let's go to the top, and as you can see right there, the heading level 1 tag, which is what this lightbox is, has a margin top of 25 pixels. So we need to reset that. So if we can come down, and if we want, we can just place it right there for now. Header H1. And let's see if that fixes it. Margin top is 0. And ta-da, you see it all the way to the top. And now we're starting to see our website take shape. We're seeing problems right up here, but we are definitely on our way, and it's starting to look good. So let's continue down to the bottom. Now let's go ahead and add our logo in. If we come back, you can see we want to change this. Right now all we have is text at the top. Let's see if we can go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to end navigation, and we're going to do the logo. And let's see what we're going to do. We're going to do slogan H1, and let's make sure that we're referencing it correctly. Slogan H1, which refers to this text up here. So now I'm going to come back, and we'll get rid of that because we're going to restate it elsewhere. That was just to give an example. And we'll restate it within here. And we're going to say margin, and we're going to do all 4 values. So top is 0, right is 0, bottom is 0, but on the left, it does need to be a certain distance from the border. And we can just measure that like so, and we can see right there about 161 pixels. That's a rough example. When I did it, I got a few more, about 165 pixels. And now you can see that pushes the text from the left all the way to the right, just a ways. Okay, but now this huge image right here seems to be messing with our layout quite a bit. So what we want to do now is we're going to do slogan img, and what is that referring to? Slogan and this image tag right here, which refers to our box. And if you want, you can make a little note yourself at the light box, like so. You don't have to though. And what I'm going to do is set a position of absolute. And what happened just there? Okay, pretty crazy. All of the text jumped up. When you set a item to have absolute positioning, you take it out of the flow of the document, and then you can easily place it anywhere that you like. Now, at first you might be thinking, well, what is the point of this? And it's so that we can place this lightbox anywhere on the page without having to worry about having it conflict with other elements. If it looks strange, don't worry, we'll come back to it. We're going to do a background of our H1. Let's go ahead and get our logo in there, right at the top. Okay. And if this is confusing for you at first, we'll remove it, and then we'll come back as soon as the logo is in. Okay, if that's helpful to you. Let's set a background, and we're going to set the background equal to that image that we cut out of the logo, and we called it images/logo.png, and we don't want it to repeat. And you can see there by default it wants to repeat, so no repeat. Okay, but now we can't really see it, can we? So what we need to do is find out the exact width and height of that image. So what we can do is measure it, or we can just open up that file. So lightbox images logo, and if we want to grab the dimensions, I'm going to go to image size, and we can see it's 124 pixels by 67. So let's make sure that we set those values within our H1 tag. Width 124 pixels, height 67. And now you can see it. Next step is position. I'm going to set a positioning context for our H1 tag. Continuing on, I'm going to set a text indent. You notice we have our image, but we still have that text right there. We don't want to see that. We only want to see that if images are turned off. So we're going to find a way to push it off the page. And the way we can do that is text align negative and some very large arbitrary number, and that will push it off the page. And I'm sorry, not text align, text indent. We'll push that all the way off even the largest screen. And now we're left with only our image. It's a nice technique. Continuing on, it's still not correct. It's all the way at the top. Let's go ahead and push it from the top down about 50 pixels. So if we come back to let's close out that image. Don't worry, it's still not looking correct, but we will get there shortly. So if you're like me, it helps to see exactly what you're working with in these cases. So let's come back and we'll come all the way to the top, and I'm going to say slogan background, and let's set background. Backgrounds really help to get an idea of what you're working with. And you can see we have that huge section, and once again that's because of this big box is taking up a lot of space, but we'll eventually be removing that. Let's go ahead and hard code a height into our slogan. And now you can see what happened there. Now it's starting to take shape. Let's come back, and like so, you can see that we want the height of our slogan to be specifically this height. Now generally that's not the best idea. Let's come back, and this will all become clear shortly. Now do you notice that this slogan is all the way at the top? How is that possible? Because if we look through our markup, we have our header, and then we have navigation, and then slogan is below it, but it looks like the slogan is taking up even the navigation. How is that possible? And it's because we're floating elements. You have to be careful when you float elements. So if we come back, you'll see nav is floated right. So if we were to get rid of that, you'll see that the slogan section jumps down like so. So how can we tell the style sheet to make sure that the slogan clears any navigation items that are above it? And as you might guess, it's using the clear property. So I'm going to come down to slogan, and I'm going to type in clear both. And now you're going to see that it cleared it. So now it looks like we still have some problems with our navigation. So let's go up and see if we can work on that a little bit more. Right back to our navigation area. So we're going to change things just a bit. You notice here how we have this nice glow. That's actually marginally difficult to achieve. So why don't we take an easier method at the beginning? So let's go ahead and get rid of the width and a height. Let's get rid of those. Now that's going to push those. And you see how the anchor tag is so low? Let's go to the anchor tags and let's see the padding top. Let's go ahead and measure and see exactly how far they are. And we'll come from the top right there. You can see roughly about 15 pixels. Let's try that one more time just to make sure. Okay, about 18 pixels actually. So let's try changing padding top to 18. So instead, it looks like there's a little typo right there, margin. Let's get rid of that. Okay, now we're slowly starting to see it take shape. Maybe we can give it a little more space on the padding top. Let's push it down a little bit more. You can play with it just a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. We can always come back and work with it more. Now let's make sure that we have the right spacing from each of these. So let's go back and right here, let's measure the distance from this icon to the text. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's try to get it roughly about the same. And we're around 90 pixels. So let's see if we set a margin 20, and let's set margin right. Let's override that and put 90 pixels and see what we end up with there. Okay, so let's see if that's correct. That seems a little bit high, but maybe not. Yeah, maybe that's right. So now we can see that we really want the middle of the icon right at that border at the top. And right now they're at the top. So let's go ahead and set a margin top. Maybe we can get rid of that. And set it maybe 13 positive. And that looks better. Maybe bring it down just a tad. We can play around with it if we need to. And now that's starting to look and take shape. But we still have this problem where the icon and the heading are not lining up correctly. And I'm thinking, as we work through this, it might be this padding left. So let's see if we were to remove that. That's much better. Look at that. Already getting better. So let's come back and compare each of them. It's looking good. We can make it a little better if we need to. And I think that's going to be good for now. If we need to, we can come back. But now we have our nice navigation laid out nicely. So now let's come back and work on this light box some more that we already touched upon earlier. Let's come back, scroll to the bottom, and we have the slogan IMG. I'm going to go ahead and reapply the position absolute. And now you can start to see, all right, now our little description is applying, but it's not lined up correctly. It's all the way against the left. And if you want, let's go ahead and get rid of the red. So I'm going to get rid of that right there. Now it's a little bit easier to look at. So let's do slogan P, and that's going to refer to the little description higher light box. And we're going to set some specific margins, and I'm not going to do all of this with you, but it's really just a matter of using the ruler tool, finding out how far it is from the top, how far it is from the left, how far it is from the left, and how far it is from the bottom. Once you get those values, just apply them and add them to your margins. So when I did it, I came to negative 27 pixels, should be pushed up a little bit, 200 pixels from the right, and we're doing that to make sure that we have a nice spacing right here and the text doesn't go all the way to the end. And you can see if we measure it, it came right around 202. Looks like I did it at 200 pixels when I measured. And 0 from the bottom and 319 from the left, and that way we push it all the way from the left and give the logo some breathing room as well. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Now let's do padding left. Don't worry if this seems hard, like how do you figure out these values? It's really just kind of a mixture of playing around with it slowly but surely. Padding top is 5 pixels. And font size, when I measured, it was 18 pixels. And the color, let's see what the color of that is. We're going to need to move back just a bit. Select that color, find out what it is, copy it, come back, and paste it in. Okay. And now we're starting to see it take shape. Let's continue on. We need to apply a border. You see it right here? Let's close that out. See if we zoom in just a little bit. There's this border right there. We need to make sure that we add that. So let's go slogan P and border left. It's going to be 1 pixel solid 4, and when I measured that, it came to 4F3B33. And now you can see that nice border, and it lines up nicely. Now, if you're wondering what the padding was for, this is why I did it. Originally, I added, when I did this myself, is I added the border, but then I realized, okay, well, we do need spacing from the text, so let's go ahead and add some padding. And that's how it works out. Good. Now, finally, find out more. That text should be white, as you can see there. So let's just go ahead and add it. Slogan A. Color is white. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this, come back, and let's see how we're doing. We can close out Eric Meyer's reset, and let's view this in an actual browser and see how far we've come. Okay, well, we've created the markup. It's still looking a bit strange, but don't worry. It's all going to come into play shortly, and I think that's a good cutting off point for now. We're going to come back later. We're going to fix, looks like we need to fix the meta type, and push this up, and we're going to continue on. Thanks for watching.